if it is at quite a distance. So I thought, I was told by the guys that I had around 40 minutes to talk, so I wasn't sure that I would have 40 minutes worth of material to talk about, just talking about this little observatory I've made. But I thought if I go through how I got to the stage of wanting to build a little observatory, that might, you might relate to that in some way, and it might help somebody else solve some problems that they've got. So I'll work through from really my entry into astrophotography through to today. So here we go, I'll just get into this. So yeah, I've been asked to talk about my mobile observatory setup, which you can see a couple of photos of here. So I'm not sure the levels of expertise in the room, but I'll take you through my journey, how I identified the needs of my current setup, in case anything that might assist someone else with their current stage and where they're at. We'll then look at the criteria for the build and how I came up with what I was going to make. I'll take you through the construction. We'll have a look at the use and some of what I've captured with the new setup. And I've accompanied the presentation just with some photos that I captured around the time of the journey that I'm talking about at each stage. So the background is, yeah, I'm based in Dunedin. I've always had an interest in the night sky. I spent a lot of time as a child camping, fishing and things. So always looked to the sky, but had really nobody to guide me much. I didn't know a lot. So it really was just a fascination in the unknown as much as anything. But as I got older, I got more curious in it all. I purchased a small refractor a few years back, figuring it'd be good to observe the moon. And we've got a good view of the harbour and city. So it's the natural thing to do. You see them a lot in houses. I don't think they get used for much more than the moon on 1 or 2 nights, and then looking at interesting things in the distance. But one day I was listening to a podcast on something quite unrelated, and the person said they were saying they could see the rings of Saturn through their binoculars, and I didn't really believe it, but I thought, okay, well, maybe I should aim my telescope at that and see if I can see the rings of Saturn. So downloaded an app, found Saturn in the sky, and sure enough, there were the rings of Saturn. I was absolutely blown away. So I really knew at that moment, it spurred a real interest that was possible from my home. And yeah, kind of lit a little bit of a fire in me. So night after night, I started to venture out when it was clear, and I became really interested in studying the moon, planets, and it was great that I could, even with my little refractor, see the moons of obviously the gas giants, which was amazing. So the next thing was I called a telescope supplier that I found online. I think I'm sure a few of you relate to the journey so far, but I thought that probably, if at a guess, around $1,500 from what I'd seen would get me something to get in really close to the objects I was looking at. So I was just wanting to get deeper with what I was able to observe. So the person kindly took the time to ask some questions and understand what I was looking for, and I think he caught on what my future might hold. So he talked me into spending quite a bit more than $1,500, and I ended up with an 8-inch Smith Cassegrain on an alt-azimuth go-to mount. Sorry, I'll just get that up. So what I discovered very quickly was that 2,000 millimeters of focal length was a very different story to a short refractor. And I had learnt a lot of lessons very quickly. It was a really good learning exercise for me to be thrown in the deep end as I began to get my head around both alignment and tracking and some of the other things that come with observing at long focal lengths. So once I come to terms with the setup, I then had another real wow moment as I explored. I slewed my go-to to a globular cluster, and I was just gobsmacked. Seeing the first globular cluster, I just was absolutely blown away. And if there was any doubt before, at that point, I was completely hooked. So I went on to visually observe all that I could, but I really wanted to share what I was seeing with my friends and my family, and I began to think about how I could capture some of what I was seeing. So I rang the same helpful person who started to see a bit of a pattern, and I think he knew I was going down a rabbit hole that he'd seen before. And I wanted to see whether there was some way to mount my phone. I thought that was the obvious thing. Maybe there's a way of mounting my cell phone to this telescope to capture what I was seeing. But he explained to me that I could get an adapter to get a DSLR attached to my SCT. And so, sure enough, it was a pretty cost-effective way of making the next step. And once I got everything hooked up, I slewed to Saturn and Jupiter, which seemed the obvious targets. And single exposures on a EOS 350D produced my first couple of photos. Saturn, I think here, the shot may have been a stacked image, but certainly that shot of Jupiter was a single exposure. So these were the first things I captured. So I was stunned. I was amazed what was possible to capture, and I was consumed by it. I watched everything I could, and I read everything I could, just to try and get better results. And it was a great time because it was in winter, and there was seemingly endless clear skies. So I would read something, and then I was able to go out the next night and try it. So I was able to make quite rapid progress in those early stages because I got a lot of clear sky time. So I quickly became aware of things such as lucky imaging, and stacking, and processing. And I did what I could to learn and experiment with techniques, as I'm sure many of you have. And each night I saw a little more progress, and I made some steps forward, but obviously went backwards along the way, and learned things, failed at things. But I began to see some really good progress. So again, I know it's not spectacular by what some are able to produce, but I was able to get some progress with my planetary stuff early on, and those were all taken with that DSLR. So I then decided to try and photograph nebula, but I had no real hope of success given that I'm situated in the city. I think light pollution is not too bad in Dunedin. Thinking that this was something only professionals captured observatories. So anyway, I tried in vain. I with the Orion Nebula, and at this point I was using star alignment on my Altaz mount, and knowing that Orion was a really bright object, I thought maybe I'd have a chance with that. So I shot a single 20-second exposure, and I was astounded to see color in the resultant image on the back of my camera. And although this blurry, faint image seems underwhelming now, this was amazing to me. I just couldn't believe what I captured. And the thing that I loved was I was now capturing things that I wasn't able to see in anything like that detail with my eye. I'd seen a smudge in the sky when I'd looked in the area, but to see some color come out of it, I was really blown away. So I had challenges arising, as everyone does, as they advance their astrophotography. So as I read and watched and understood more, I began to use Deep Sky Stacker to stack multiple exposures, and started to see more exciting results. So with these results came new challenges. So I was starting to notice star trails by long exposures, just because of the nature of my setup, struggling to keep stars round. And while looking for fixes, I realized that I was going to need to polar align and move away from the altazimuth unless I got a wedge. So I explored the option of stacking my existing mount with a wedge. It was actually going to be quite expensive. And when I started to look at the total cost of that setup, I think the only reason I would have got a wedge, it would have probably always been a compromise to just adapt my existing setup. And the total combined cost was still similar to what it was going to cost to get an equatorial mount. And the more I read, the more I realized it was probably the direction I needed to go. So So I captured this in one-shot color. Naturally, without mount to track. So, and obviously it was completely unguided at the time too. So I was also encountering a lot of noise and vignetting, and as I led to my exposures to capture more light. So I wasn't using any calibration of any sort on my and I was finding the nights shorter and shorter as they were consumed capturing these multiple long exposures to stack, which, you know, I read about what other people were doing. For some reason, I thought that I was going to be able to do it shortcut way, and I wasn't going to have to go through this long process of sitting up all night taking long exposures. But I somehow found myself spending a lot of time outside watching the screen and waiting for the results. So I was staying up the whole time as I had minimal automation at this point, and setup was becoming very time consuming too. So I was beginning to integrate more equipment into the mix, and shooting at over 2 meters focal length, I realized was really accentuating the shortcomings of my setup. So the equatorial mounts within my price range were also not capable of carrying the load of my 8-inch CT, but I realized to have an entry-level equatorial mount and then load it up with a would probably be a pretty unpleasant experience from what I've been reading. So I purchased an Dioptron CM25P from Andrew. Thank you very much. And I decided to invest in a modest 80mm refractor with good glass and a focal length of 600mm with a reducer down to 510mm. And because I didn't understand until this point that there were much larger targets, given that I'd been focusing on planetary stuff early, I was under the impression that it was all about a longer focal length. But once I realized that a lot of the velocity was in quite wide space, I became more comfortable with the fact that I could scale back a little bit and still, really see some amazing things and capture amazing things. So I purchased a small and highly sensitive guide scope to go with it. And at this stage, I was using a combination of astrophotography tools. I'd seen people use it and figured it was a pretty basic way of getting into automation. PhD guiding and Photoshop for my processing because again, I was familiar with it and I was able to find tutorials showing me how to do basic processing. So I faced new challenges at this point. I was spending at least 30 minutes, most clear nights, setting up and polar aligning, often during really good acquisition time, but my work was often taking me, and work dinner. I've got a young daughter. By the time I was out ready to set up, I was consuming time and it was getting closer to bedtime. So I always felt short on time. And at this point, I was starting to shoot integration times of 2 hours or more in one-shot color. And I'd not yet left my rig unattended, certainly not through a meridian flip. I'd only ever done that manually, and I would often avoid targets because I could see they were going to pass through the meridian. That was another hurdle to get over. I needed more acquisition time, but I also needed more sleep. So obviously automation was pretty appealing, and I was often finding wind was an issue due to my relatively small mount and exposure to wind in my location. So these are all things that were building up to me recognizing that I had problems that needed a solution. And I was shooting in one-shot color. Light pollution was limiting my exposure times and potential targets. So these are kind of the new set of challenges that I was facing as I got to the limits of what my existing equipment could provide. So the next round of solutions, after a whole lot more research, I realized that I was going to need to move to a mono camera to get to where I needed to go. So I purchased the famous ZWO 1600mm with the filter wheel, RGB filters, and a set of narrowband filters. They were the basic ZWO ones that came with the ZWO filter wheel. And that gave me great results in noise reduction and sensitivity, but now to learn about image calibration. So I began to research the options, either a roll-top observatory or a mobile observatory to maximize data acquisition time and minimize setup time. At this point, I recalled an earlier comment from a telescope salesman, and he said, "This hobby gets expensive fast," and I genuinely believed it didn't apply to me. I thought it was going to be, relatively cheap to do what I wanted to achieve, but I quickly found myself burrowing deep down a rabbit hole, and it did get more expensive by the minute. And I know it's not necessary, but certainly for me, it seemed justified very quickly to me to invest in the next stage. But I made sure at each stage I felt I was getting everything out of the equipment that I could before upgrading. But certainly, unlike other hobbies and things that I've been involved in, cycling, fly fishing, things like that, where money often is just spent to buy flashier gear, but not necessarily better. I did like the fact that when you made it best in this field, you were usually getting value for money, particularly if you spoke to the right people. Andrew's been great for that. So has anybody got any questions at this point before I move on to the observatory stuff? All right. Great. So I like to build things. So I figured I'd find an adapter design that would work. But the more I researched it, the more I realized that I was going to need a permanently dedicated spot on our section if I was going to build a roll-top observatory. And the difficulty is our section isn't particularly large, and the only real area that would have suited on our lawn is, or on our yard, is a lot of the night sky is obstructed because it's close to a two-story house, our two-story house. So it became obvious to me that the only way I was going to be able to do this in any kind of cost-effective manner was to build something on our deck, which is elevated and actually has really good views of most of the night sky, and particularly away from the light pollution of the city, which was good. So the criteria for the mobile observatory I wanted to build, it needed to be as compact as possible. I wanted it to be quick to set up with opening doors and a removable roof. It needed to be relatively cheap to construct, not too unattractive as it would be in the outdoor living area all the time. I wanted it to be mobile, so it could be moved out of the way when we were using the deck during the day. Weatherproof, secure, passively ventilated to keep gear cool and allow for everything to come down to temperature quickly in the evening, particularly shooting with an SCT being so sensitive to temperature variations. It needed to be sturdy when locked in place, and had wind shelter to gear heavy enough to counter wind and other movement while being light enough to handle during construction and relocation. So I was reluctant to even go down this trail because I had become quite convinced that a permanent pier was almost necessary to sort of accuracy and solid mount that was required. about 1.6 meters at the front. And that also is quite good because wood is often cut to come 1.8 meter width sheets. So I live close to a saltwater environment. I've got the harbour on one side and the sea on the other, which isn't great for seeing as an aside, but anyway, can't much about that for now. And so I needed to make all of the fixings on it stainless steel. So I constructed all the panels individually so I could paint them entirely for weatherproofing prior to final fit up. So you'll see in this photo in the bottom right, I'll just get a pointer on here. So it's just me, if water ever did get in and settle and sit on any part of it, it wasn't going to rot on me. It also allowed me to, by doing it with individual panels, I was able to construct it in my garage away from where it was going to be situated. And I was then able to relocate it later, piece by piece, up onto the deck above. I used screws to make a wooden frame out of 3x2 framing timber, which kept it quite light. 4x2 was almost too bulky and heavy duty for what I needed. A lot of the structural integrity is just in the design of the framing and how it's tied together with the paneling. And so it didn't need to be heavier duty than 2x3, 3x2. I then did a trial fit up, as you can see in the top right, and I brad nailed, which are like very small nails that you can drive in with quite a cheap mini nail gun, battery powered nail gun. Brad nails the ply onto the faces of the timber, which does create a very good structure once you put the combination of the timber beams in a frame on the outside of the facing. You reduce considerably all of the flex, and then when you put your panels together, it does gain quite a lot of structural integrity, certainly enough for what I needed to do. Once I had everything in place, I was able to remove all of the screws and lay it all out for painting. So I designed it by all of the screws were accessible as you took it apart, and as you can see there, each panel just came off, and I figured as well, with it being modular in that way, I could potentially reuse parts of it if I needed to make it bigger or change something later. So finished product. So do these photos look okay? Can you see them all right? Okay. So top left, you can see it all closed up, and the first four photos are just showing the roof just manually lifts off, so it's latched here in four corners, and then it just slides back, tilts off, and then ends up sitting back and just hooking on this. You'll see I put a little bit of timber there, and the gap inside here is the same width as the doors, so it just helps to align the doors when the lid's shut. And that sits the back like that. It's never blown off or anything. I imagine if it was windy enough for that to be picked up and blown away, I probably wouldn't be out shooting anything. So the vents are just these weatherproof vents, top and bottom, and they provide enough air through it that during super hot in there. I mean, it still definitely gets warm in there because it's in the sun all day. It's a pretty sunny spot, but it does reduce the effect of it just getting turning into an oven in there and baking my gear. And you'll see this is what I'm talking about with overlapping all the joints. So this is where the two doors meet, and you know, if water is driving in, it won't get around to that corner and inside. So that was all just part of the design to make sure my gear was protected. So opened up, this is how it looks with the doors swung open. I can come back to any of these if you're interested in having a look later. These are just with the setup, so that's with the red cat extra short refractor on there. So this is what it looks like during the day. It's tucked in the corner of the deck. If we over or something, the entire deck's usable, and it just like somewhere you'd store your which is also good from a security standpoint because prying eyes don't see anything valuable when they walk past that. And I can padlock it all if we go away on holiday. All of the latches are lockable, so I'll show you that too. So these are just the fittings that are on it. So this is the latch that keeps the doors tightly closed and stops them letting any weather in. This little padlock bolt there. This latch allows me to swing the doors back, and as you can see in this shot here, those are situated there, and in a constructed way, the latch the door under a small amount of tension when those latches are attached, and that avoids any potential for those doors to move and create vibration if there's a small breeze. So everything's very rigid when it's in position to shoot. These latches were particularly good because they screw down. You can change how tightly. So I didn't have to be super accurate on everything. I was able to put that on, and if the wood warps at all or anything, I can adjust the latches to keep it nice and weathertight and really tightly on there. Hinges, again, I just went with really heavy-duty hinges so that the doors aren't moving around. It's got good structural integrity. Hinges aren't really something you think about until you're putting something together like this and standing there at the wall of hinges at Bunnings going, what the hell do I need? But I'm pretty sure it's going to work, so I could flip those back. The only thing that I would change in hindsight is these are slight configuration now that we've got such a heavy payload inside. And there's a little bit of distance, which means that these little locking feet can make contact with the exterior of it. So I'll probably upgrade them to something a little bit heavier because it can they foul occasionally trying to lock it in place. So I ran silicon down any non-moving joint. I placed an overhang on the removable roof to allow it to self-locate and to flash the joint where it overhangs the roof and just avoid any potential driving rain from coming inside. I had to paint a long time to dry because the clearance is very tight and it would stick together if I didn't. These are just things to consider if you're thinking of building something like this. Every some way just create to ingress it. The doors overlap, as I showed you in that first shot, to water ingress. I placed ventilation, equalizing temperature inside. And one thing the only thing really that I had to add to the mix to ensure there's no real flex or movement when it's being used or when it's tracking is there is quite a large span from this corner to this corner. So I just use a piece of wood just like that one, poke it under, use it like a lever to lift it very slightly when I set up, and I've just got a perfectly cut piece of that I can put underneath that it rests on and creates a central point for it to settle on, and it really just makes the entire rig very rigid. So now when I set up, I can roll the observatory out from the corner of my deck into the center of the deck in around 30 seconds. I've got some small marks I locate the observatory on, and that allows me to polar align the mount very accurately. It goes on, and then I've got a couple of half dials on mount adjustment to fine-tune my polar alignment, and usually within 30 seconds it will be spot on. I use a digital polar scope that again Andrew put me onto with plate solving, so I just use an iPolar, and it's very simple. Basically, I turn that on if I'm within, or if the southern celestial pole is within the frame, it will show a little red dot. It's very easy to adjust to get it perfectly polar aligned. So that's a very quick process again. So within a minute, usually, I'm set up and ready to go. It's very level because it's in the same spot every time on the deck. So I've got it leveled, it stays level. I can plug in one plug, so I've just got one power cord coming out of there, and you'll see in the next frame I've got my my current setup aligned, and you'll see it's important to have one plug because trying to rewire it every night would really eat into the time it takes around an hour probably now to get it properly set up from scratch. Really, the only time I need to do anything with wiring is when there's a problem, which isn't really often given how reliable gear is these days, or changing the camera or the OTA. So it's a massive time saver. And for me, the real motivation for this is that I'm relatively time poor, and it feels like in the last 6 months, there are very few clear nights. And so any time that's acquisition time, I don't want that to be wasted setting up. So that's really been the primary motivation for this. And it's made this hobby, I'm never reluctant to go out and start shooting, even if I think there's only going to be an hour of clear sky. I'll get out there and add some data to my project because it takes me no time to get set up. I can be shooting very, very quickly, and yeah, no wasted time. So yeah, the reason it needs to be a one plug setup is because now, how deep down the rabbit hole I've ended up, I've got a CEM70, which I can't recommend enough. For the weight of the mount to its payload capacity, it's fantastic. I love it. And it's got an integrated polar scope. So basically, I set up, I take the lens cap off the polar scope on iPolar, and I'm polar aligned in seconds. I use 3 different OTAs. So I've got a RedCat 51, which I use for my wider stuff, my Skywatcher 80 ED, the Lestron Edge HD 8-inch. I've been tempted by other stuff, but I think I'm yet to realize what I've got. So I think it would to go and upgrade anything that I've got currently. And I've learned quickly that the best amount is far more important than investing in the glass early on. So I don't think it's necessary to go spending a whole lot more expensive and very heavy refractors until I get a little bit more in. So I've got electronic focusers on my main scope. So on my little refractor here, my AED and the Edge HD8, being fantastic, and it has allowed me to really advance things because I can be certain that when I come off a night of acquisition, I'm not going to pull a whole lot of subs and find out that they're wasted because my focus was poor. So automatic focus has been fantastic. I've put off-axis guiders on my SCT, and on my refractor, I'm actually using an off-axis guider now as well. I really like it. It works well, and I find my tracking results. The calibration is easy, and certainly it produces incredibly. I don't know if you guys have looked at those as single frame subs come out of those cameras, but they are remarkable. So QHY filter wheels, optolong narrowband filters. I now use Nina and fully automate my imaging sessions, so I still enjoy the early parts of capturing when I'm working on a project. But if I'm going to be just tracking a target for 6 hours through, just capturing hydrogen alpha and running that through a meridian flip, it's not to be able to set, forget, go to bed, wake up in the morning and enjoy browsing through the data, and then I can spend the cloudy nights processing. Happy to talk about that with anyone if there's anyone interested, but I'm not sure I'll probably use it. But I use to program multiple targets. Sometimes I'll do more than one target in a night, one shot colour, doing a bit of exploring. Place with it, so that allows me to work night after night on the same target and get almost pixel level accuracy when I'm mapping up to previous frames for renewing the project. I change filters and refocus based on filter change, time, perhaps. and temperature change. I use meridian flipping, frames can shot in there, quite helpful with that, and average around 7 hours of execution time on my recent targets. So it works really well for me to continue on with the project if, you know, clouds go up to halfway through early night. So I use Hinges with temperature and humidity monitoring, which has again helped a lot, particularly with recent weather we've been having. It's been really dewy, so that's meant I'm not waking up to crappy thunder in the morning. I picked the Astrophotography with me, as you can see up here. There's very little off the scope that I'm having to run your data cables to other than the essentials. A lot of it just all distributed from that box on. Which is a flat panel, which has been a real advancement in calibration frames. I know we're getting short on time, so I won't get into that too much. And the other really good thing for my automation and making the most of the short time I've got is a 50 by camera, which I'd be happy to help anybody replicate. Just using a Raspberry Pi and a small one-shot colour camera. So I hit cloud covers like I go out and it's great. I'll look there and I'll see the really bad haze clouds and fast. That bonus is I wake up every morning to it for the entire evening, and sometimes I capture really interesting stuff cruising through it. If a meteorite streak across the sky, usually got captured on there, so it's always interesting too. I use pixels now. So these are some of the shots that I've got recently. That's from that one-shot colour, the classic horse-head flame combo, which is really nice. I'm still adding data to this, but I'm really happy with where it's got to, and the detail is starting to come out nicely on that. This was first light with one-shot colour camera, the 268N. Again, I've seen much more spectacular versions of it, but I was really happy. There's not a lot of data in that, but it's amazing how much detail you can pull out, particularly the 16-bit. I haven't done much HDR work on that, but if I process that, I know that I can get a lot more detail than before, while still a lot of detail in the fainter nebulosity. This was just a project I worked on over the winter, capturing the Large Magellanic Clouds with my RedCat 51. And this was pretty early on with that new one-shot colour camera as well. And I've been used as a way of working out what the next target is going to be. An interesting region with a wider, 250mm focus, and then we're into an area of interest. So in this case, I knew the Tarantula Nebula was going to be my area of interest, but I wanted to just work from the wider field and into the Tarantula Nebula. It's one of the most challenging targets to process, I've found, because the sheer number of stars is overwhelming, particularly in one-shot colour. So it was a real challenge to get that detail in Tarantula Nebula. Again, I've seen much more spectacular versions of it. I'm really happy with how that's come out. So my most recent project has been Centaurus A, running chicken nebula. I like this orientation. You can actually see why it's called the running chicken, with its feet and its head and its beak, what have you. The thing I really love about this was my first light with the Optilong narrowband filters and the 268M cool camera. And this was really fun to process, and not just because of the detail that it pulled out and the beautiful contrast and great colours, but I spotted this in the corner and thought I had some dirt in my image frame or some kind of fault on the lens. I don't know what it was, and I wasn't aware of anything there, but I was excited to spot that I'd also captured a little planetary nebula. And the thing I love about this camera is with 26 megapixels, if you spot faint detail like that, you can move in and actually make a decent frame of a corner of the shot, or you can move in on these spot globules here and really start to play with detail in there, and you end up with multiple interesting frames from your one large sub-exposure, even if you take a reasonably wide field shot. So from here, I want to find a home one day with space for a dedicated observatory, with room for a bit more gear, and a clear sky view away from the light pollution of the city. I want to work a little bit more on the Milky Way and in aurora photography. So I've got an EOS RA, which is essentially a multi-DSLR camera, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with aurora photography goes on down here, but we're getting some wonderful evenings up there on Saturday night, and I was able to catch time lapse quite decent aurora in it. I'm really enjoying that, and I don't have to travel too far from home to do that. And then, I've visited more sky locations. I'm not too far from Tekapo with the mobile setup, and I really want to get a campaign going for Dunedin dark sky, because with the LED light replacement down here, there is noticeable light pollution, and I think we've actually got a chance to be populated to see decent views of the night sky getting better by the day. I'm noticing it as LED light replacement happens, but there's also still a lot of obnoxious light pollution in our city, which we need to clean up. So I know Ian Finn, for names familiar to you guys from the university, and keen astrophotographer economist. He's big on this as well, so I'm really keen to get more people on board to see if we can improve the dark sky situation down here. So if anyone's interested, stuff that I'm doing online, certainly not by any means, but a lot of people who have got this hobby. I'm not sure if any of you guys are in that stage, but always happy to discuss anything and try and solve problems with people, because it's nice to find kindred spirits. There aren't many around, so hope that's helpful in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone got any questions? Well, I'd be definitely interested to know more about your all sky cam that you built, because building your own, they're quite expensive. All sky cams tend to be, and building ones definitely doesn't sound like it would be obviously not impossible, and a Raspberry Pi is quite easy to get your hands on. I've got one sitting around actually, so yeah, I'd be quite keen to hear more about that for sure.
I'd be happy to help with that. As you see in that photo, it's pretty straightforward. It's an enclosure from JCar, it's just a project box. The dome I used a dummy security camera dome initially from JCar, but it was rubbish. The optics on it were shocking, and it very quickly faded in the sun. So I ordered from one of the plastics manufacturing companies up north a dome. It was about $40 or something, and it's made out of really good polycarbonate that doesn't fade in the sun. This is just some protection from street lights, because they seem to have a pretty bad effect on city secant exposures. It's a reasonably entry-level ZWO camera, which comes with a wide-angle lens, because I think a lot of people do adapt them to full sky. So I've got a bit of a shopping list there. And then the great thing is, there's a tutorial online from a guy overseas somewhere who was using this to collect aurora photos, and he's written the entire Raspberry Pi program. It sounds intimidating, but you go and buy a $30 Raspberry Pi. It uses power over Ethernet, so all you have to do is get a cable to it from somewhere, and that powers it and gives it good bandwidth. And then you flash it with the software that the guy's written, and if you've got a reasonable level of proficiency, you'll be able to build a operating. And there's really not.
I think we've lost you, Sam.
No, I've got you now. Yeah,
right.
Sorry about that. So it's a pretty basic stuff. So I'm happy to discuss that any time. But if you want, you can touch base with me after this, Sean, or send you a link to the DIY thing, and I'll be happy to help anyone who gets stuck along.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you could provide a link, I'll put it up on our group page so everybody can access it, and I'll have a look at it, because it's something I've been thinking about doing. So that would be excellent. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd love to build a site with essentially a map of New Zealand, where you can click on everyone's all sky cameras and check what the sky's doing all around the place. It'd be a pretty straightforward thing to do. I'm sure there's multiple people there that would have be able to have input on that, but it would be a cool thing to be able to see. And as I say, each morning I wake up to a time lapse that's 2 minutes of, at the moment I'm watching the galactic core rise. It's absolutely beautiful. I see the Milky Way come over the top, and you can see what the moon's doing. You can see the planets track up. You can see the relative movement each night. It really is great.
Awesome.
Oh, I had a question about the all-sky camera. Does it pick up meteors?
Yes, it does. Most nights. So you can work through frame by frame in the morning, which is a pretty slow process. But what I tend to do is when I watch it, I put it on a bigger screen, and if you focus, you learn to just watch it in a way where you're just looking for differences between the frames, and you'll just see the flashes. And then if you mark the timestamp, then you can go back and look at the frame by frame. And, most nights I'll capture 10 or 15 shooting stars, and some nights, the quite spectacular ones, which cover quite an arc of the sky. I've had nothing incredible yet, but I've only had it operating for about 4 months. But most mornings when I wake up, there'll be multiple interesting things, and obviously you can see how many starlings come over each night, and you can see the ISS come through. And what's cool is when you see multiple passes of the ISS in an evening, you can see how it moves from pass to pass across the sky. So it's a really fascinating way of studying the wider field of the sky. And the Milky Way, because they're 30-second exposures, the Milky Way looks quite spectacular. You can see all of the dust, and you can see the dark nebula, as it comes overhead.
Excellent. That was definitely fun. I'm quite amazed with your observatory being on wheels that the whole thing actually works. When you say it was mobile and on a deck, it's everybody thinks never, but obviously because you obviously decked concrete, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
So that's obviously not quite such a problem. I guess you have to put it on the wooden blocks to get the kind of stability to work.
Yeah, all I do is lock the wheels, but if I can push it and it will not move because it's locked in each corner. It locks it from almost every angle. So it's very, very stable. I was surprised, but as I was building it, I was testing to see how much structural integrity it was gaining as I put it together piece by piece. And I was really surprised. You'll see I have put some additional bracing up here just to stop it from flexing in any slight breezes. But as I say, even in a gentle wind, and even if I walk across the deck with my 8-inch without a reducer on it, so it's shooting at 2,000 millimeters, I will keep it within 1 arctic inch of correction on my guiding graph. It is consistent, and you can start to see the gusts of wind, but they are no worse, like with my dew shield on there, they're no worse than they would have been with it sitting on the deck. So I think, I know Dylan O'Connell talks about this quite a bit as well, people get far too caught up in, putting something 6 feet into the earth to give themselves stability for their rig. But, I'm getting results I'm really happy with, and I don't have to reject many frames, and the secret to it has been really getting that mount, that heavy mount on that tri-tier. It's amazing what you can get away with, and I've been really impressed with the results. I'm sure it'll start to get pushed if I ever went and blew the budget on a 14-inch SCT or something, but I'm probably going to be in a whole different realm then. I don't know if I'm going to be in a mobile setup at that point, if it ever happens.
Yeah, no, that's very impressive. Anybody else got anything that's at this point? No? The results speak for themselves there. I like your approach to taking the image and then bringing out multiple areas of it on a multiple picture. That really actually brings out what's interesting in the image rather than just here's the nebula. You're bringing out some of the interesting parts, which I think works really well there.
I really like this approach of shooting quite a wide field, because often when you use a sky atlas or something, you either get overwhelmed by having too many things showing on there and you can't find interesting targets to shoot, or to cull it down, you only end up with the major targets. So by shooting quite a wide field and stacking it and putting some effort into a wide field, I'll often find targets that aren't often being photographed. So at the moment, my current project is the Statue of Liberty Nebula, which is really absolutely stunning. It's got these big, I'm sure you've seen it, but it's got these big spears of gas that are being pushed out as young stars. And I haven't really heard about it or seen it, and it's right between the Orion Nebula and the Centaurus, but it's just not a popular target. I found it because I shot a wide field of the area, a lot of this interesting region, and sure enough, there it was. It's dangerous. It starts to colour targets based on the magnitude of Scott Atlas will be coloured. So I'd recommend not doing it. Do some wide field stuff, and you might find other wouldn't have this area that don't have an EGC. They're not popular, but they make targets.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. My experience has been the same, that planetarium software and even lists just don't give you an idea of what's in the actual areas of the sky. And the magnitudes coming out of the planetariums and coming out of the list are almost meaningless because you don't have the combination of that with the size and the surface area and what's around them. And an object can be quite stunning and easy to photograph and have a fairly low theoretical magnitude, whereas some other objects sound really bright, but you just can't take pictures of them because they're too diffused or there's too much around them. So yeah, I think the wide field image idea is definitely a really great idea. There's a few books around that consist of those kind of wide field images to help with the same thing. If you haven't got a setup you can take wide field images, there's a few books around that are very high quality wide field images of all these areas, and you can literally just see, in the same way you could with the Magellanic Cloud there, you can see all those nebula. They're tiny, but they're really clear, and you point your telescope at them and you know there's going to be something there.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and that's a big part of me. Sometimes you feel like you're discovering a little secret and you find something that's just absolutely stunning. And, like that little planetary nebula in this shot, discovering that was just a joy for me because I had no intention of capturing it. And I had to look around just to find the name. It wasn't showing up on any of my planetarium software because it was being filtered out because it became one of a million targets if I had that magnitude showing up. So yeah, it's starting to find little like that.
Is that the blue planetary nebula?
No, it doesn't. It's got like one of those PCK classifications. So just a long string of numbers. It has absolutely no name. I've never seen anyone actually target it. Occasionally people have put the name and classification as one of the objects shot with Lander Centauri here, but a lot of the time I've actually seen people edit it out as a fault and it doesn't show up on this frame, and I think a lot of people see it not realising that it is a planetary nebula and clone it out or whatever, thinking that it's just more mess on their filter, on their sensor. That's my only conclusion because my one-shot colour doesn't pick it up. It's not sensitive enough, and I very rarely see it when I look at other photos of that. Now that I'm looking for it.
Cool. All right, Joe, that's been really great, and your timing was perfect, by the way. Just bang on. Yeah, well, thank you very much, and I'll definitely be in touch about that, certainly about that wide field, that all sky cam setup and see what you're doing there. And that's been really good. I'm sure everybody's
Thanks for your time, guys.
No, great. Well, thank you very much for coming along. And, we've got a nice turnout for here.